Hei og velkommen til denne samtalen som vi har kalt «Kan jeg oversette det?». Mitt navn er Signe Prøis, jeg er forlegger i Camino Forlag og også oversetter til norsk av den boka som er tema her i dag, nemlig «Bare fjellene er min venn», vitnesbyrd fra Manus fengsel av journalisten Behrouz Boochani. Denne boka skrev han i form av tekst- og talemeldinger i løpet av de nesten 6 årene han satt i australsk asylfangenskap på Stillehavsøya Manus Island, etter å ha flyktet fra hjemlandet Iran. Senere ble disse tekstbrokkene og talemeldingene oversatt fra persisk til engelsk av blant annet oversetter Omid Tofighian, som er her sammen med oss i dag, og satt sammen i fellesskap med forfatteren til boka som vi skal snakke om. For hvordan finner man et språk for så ekstreme opplevelser som flukt og fangenskap? Og hvordan oversetter man sånne opplevelser når man ikke er i nærheten og har like erfaringer selv? Og oversetter Tofighian har også omtalt dette samarbeidet som som en filosofisk fellesaktivitet, og vi lurer på hva han legger i det. For å snakke om dette har vi fått med oss Erlend Wichne, som i tillegg til å være stipendiat i oversettervitenskap ved Universitetet i Agder, selv er gjendikter og kjenner til de ulike utfordringene som en oversetter kan møte i sitt arbeid. Denne samtalen vil foregå på engelsk, så med det vil jeg bare gi ordet til Erlend og Behrouz og Omid.
Thank you, Signe. So today we are going to talk about your book, No Friend But the Mountains, Writing from Manus Prison, published first in English in 2019 and then in Norwegian this year, translated by Signe Prøis. I've been looking very much forward to this conversation with you. Your book sheds light upon experiences many times left in the dark behind prison fences. And today I hope that we will be able to talk about your experiences in the prison at Manus Island, and particularly about writing and translating these experiences. In the case of this book, it seems to me that there is no clear distinction between the two activities of writing and translation. Behrouz, you wrote a text on mobile phones when you were detained alongside fellow asylum seekers in an Australian prison at the Papua New Guinean island of Manus in the Pacific Ocean. And Omid, you received the mobile text from Behrouz. They were written in Persian language, which you translated into English, and at the same time you composed the book. From this process arise new perspective around refugee experience and about what writing and translating such experiences can teach us about writing and translation itself. I would like to start this conversation about the theme of creativity. There is a passage in your book, Behrouz, where you imagine the Iranian family that inhabited your room in the prison before you. Their writing on the walls of the room make you sort of feel their presence. There are drawings, signatures, dates, but also poetry, probably written by the wife and the oldest daughter of the family, you argue, because the father would be too proud to permit himself to get emotional like this. Suzanne, the mother, and Shagayeg, the oldest daughter, use poetry to interpret their destiny, future, and their life. This is one of many traces and accounts of creativity in your book. And as far as I can see, you relate to this feature of creativity in two ways. It is an universally human feature expressed in numerous facets by different imprisoned people that you write about. And creativity is also something that constitutes you and your own self in such a fundamental way that you sometimes write that you perceive yourself as a stranger in the prison community. In the prison community, many people escape the fear of loneliness and dark memories by being noisy and continuously together. But you are one of those who cannot do that and who has to live through what you call the paradoxes of prison by yourself. In the silence, you cultivate your ability to imagine an alternative to the reality that you live. The prisoners, you say, build their identity in opposition to the concept of freedom. Can you tell us about creativity in prison, both as this universal feature that you give so many examples of, but also as something that sort of made you the one who wrote this account of that we find in No Friends But the Mountains?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I think so. You mentioned a very good point: creativity and the role of creativity in circumstances like Manus prison system. We are, as I describe in the book, we are facing a system, a very bureaucratic, complicated system, which designed to take the detainees' freedom. And of course, the detainees, they already detained in that prison, but even in that circumstances, I mean, inside the cage, the system doesn't tolerate that people feel freedom even for a second, And in a part of the book, I described that the most free space in the camp, in the prison, is the toilets. That just people go to the toilet, and that is the most free space for the detainees. And even the guards knock the door, and they just want to remind of the detainees in the toilet that we are here and we control you. So we are looking at you, we are watching at you. And in that circumstances, that camera is there, always is there, 24 hours for many years. The guards are there, and they control everything, all of the detainees. So in that circumstances, I think that even I described that even when you are sleeping, through nightmares, still you feel the system. So in front of that system, which designed to take your freedom, I think the most powerful approach, or the most powerful way to really resist in front of the system, to keep your identity as a human, is creativity. And creativity helps you to feel freedom, to feel freedom and feel life, that you are alive, and you can enjoy your life even for a second inside that prison camp. So, but for me as a writer, that happened through writing and through artistic language. But that's not mean that other refugees who were not able to write, they were not creative. So many refugees, many detainees inside the camp, they were creative, but in their own ways. For example, the biggest example is the character in the book, Mason the Whore. That character that is dancing, is performing, is singing, and is through humor, is playing with the system. And some people inside that prison are just making fun with others, through humor, through humor language, through comedy. Even there is a character in the book that he's a comedian, and sometimes some people just, they do that creativity through just looking after the animals, looking after the flowers, the trees, gardening. All of the detainees, they always, try to find a way to be creative, you know, and that creativity actually help you to protect yourself in front of the system. But that happened for me through writing, you know, and sometimes through cinema, you know, because before the book, I was working with Arash Kamali Sarvastani on a movie. And sometimes through journalism, through, you know, this book, you know, I mean, that creativity is very important in that circumstances. So just to keep yourself, protect yourself as a human, and you don't forget that who you are. You are a human, and you are not only a number in that situation.
Thank you, Behrouz. And I want to stay a little bit in this theme of creativity, and also as in your role as a writer here in this, because your multifaceted way of creativity, of representing creativity, made me think of a chapter in another book entitled "The Drowned and the Saved" by Primo Levi. The book was sort of one of his last ones, and a resume of what he had tried to communicate about Holocaust during his life as a writer. The chapter that I am thinking of is called exactly the intellectual in Auschwitz. And there are, of course, many differences between an extermination camp as Auschwitz and Manus prison. The function of Manus prison was not to make you work or to kill you, but you were still dehumanized, tortured, and forced to wait in endless, absurd lines for all necessities of life. And when I was taking notes to prepare this conversation, I wanted to find themes that I could ask you questions about. And every theme I've sort of found, and in a way started with the word identity. And in Levi's book, he describes in what way an obsessive attempt to remember just only a rhyme by the poet Dante, for him re-established a connection with the past and saved this past from sort of oblivion, and also strengthened his own identity. And for him, Levi, in Auschwitz, this proved for him that his head had not stopped working despite the daily struggle in the extermination camp. Through his creativity, he got some sort of vacation or an occasion to find himself again. But where Levi in his book is sort of categorizing the intellectual away from the sort of not intellectuals, I have the impression that in your book, and also as you say here, there is no real distinction between you as an intellectual worker and other prisoners with their sort of innate creativity and other qualities coming from a life and a working life. But on the other hand, as you also mentioned here, you are sort of quite sharp in your observations about those people who accept the system and who accept the system and that keeps you imprisoned. The system make them animals and they accept it. But I am wondering if you can see ways in which you, again as an intellectual worker, and especially with the sort of the global international network that you had, did you have another experience of life in prison? Was there any sort of ways in which you had communication that sort of were helping you, or maybe being a burden for you? I don't know. So I'm wondering about this, exactly your role here, or not your.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very good point. You mentioned Primo Levi and Holocaust on that time, but I think I should make it clear that we should understand Manus in this age, you know, in the context of Manus itself, you know. So we really cannot compare them, but generally, of course, we can compare anything. But I think we should understand Manus prison system in this age that we are living, you know, in this time, that we are living in a time that even the detainees can have access to phone sometimes. Of course, this phone is illegal, so the detainees or the writer of the book, which is me, smuggle a phone into the prison. But of course, on that time, in Holocaust period, of course, people couldn't do that. So that was a different context. But in Manus prison system, actually, that I had access to phone. Of course, it was illegal, and 2-3 times they attacked my room and they took my phone, and I had to smuggle another phone. But this phone actually helped me to have communication with out of the prison, with people outside. And you mentioned the intellectual, collaboration or thinking and sharing ideas. So of course I had that opportunity to do that, and just to understand the prison system with some of my friends that I was in touch, sometimes with the other journalists, sometimes with just people I was in touch. But of course, most of time, I and Omid, we had a long conversation. So almost every day that when I had access to the phone, so we could share our ideas. And I think that intellectual, exchange and conversation, of course, that was very helpful. So we can include that through creativity. So still we can understand that that even having an intellectual conversation with someone who is living outside is really very helpful to that you stay strong, and for a second, for a moment, for a few minutes, or that just you feel that you are not in that prison and you are out of the prison. And I think that is very important. And sometimes that happens just through singing. In the book I mentioned that, that sometimes by singing singing a Kurdish song, that music, that piece of music, that piece of song take you and to Kurdistan, take you to the place and the land, the hometown that you left. And, and still you have that connection with the past. And so, I mean, that is very important. Even in the book, it's very clear that sometimes the main character jump the fences and leave the camp, the prison camp, and go to the beach, And, always there is this challenge, or sometimes he just go to the roof. And, always there is this struggle and challenge between the prison and the main character. But generally in my real life, of course, I and Omid, for many years, we were in touch, and we were talking, and we had this opportunity to have conversation about the prison. And of course, that's really helpful for someone in that circumstances to survive.
Omid, in your preface to the book No Friend But the Mountains, you write that to translate the voice and the perspective of Behrouz's text, one needs a big imagination. And I imagine that for you, there must have been a point in time where you were sort of realizing that what you were going to translate was going to be a book established on Behrouz's texts sent from the Manus prison. I am wondering about when and how you made this realization that this was going to be a book. And I'm also wondering about how you evaluated your own situation in contrast to that of Boochani's, where you as a philosopher, academic, translator, were working from within the Australian frontiers that Behrouz and others had tried to enter, and that were depriving him and his fellow prisoners from expressing their abilities as human beings. What could sort of Behrouz see of the world that you could not see? And what kind of responsibility did you recognize when taking the role of the translator for his accounts?
Thank you for that question. This is something that, to be honest, I've been thinking about from day one, and it's something that has grown, has developed from the time I started working with Behrouz, and still today I'm learning so many new things after reflecting on the whole process and looking at the directions that the book has moved into and the way it's been taken up. And now we're talking to people in Norway about it, about the translation of a translation. So this is a really fascinating topic, and I to be honest, I think also that a whole book needs to be written about this particular interaction, and the book needs to be understood as one moment, one phase, one example of a very long process. And that process began before the book. So originally I was translating Behrouz's journalism and working on different kinds of activism with Behrouz, thinking about ways that we can challenge the system, dismantle the system, thinking about abolition in this context, not just in terms of borders and immigration detention, but much wider than that. So this all then developed, came together and influenced the book when we started working on the book. And after the book was finished, it continued. And so still today, the book is actually part of a much larger story. It's not the main focus. The book is one element in a very complex, multi-dimensional narrative that includes many other people. And I think here it's important to mention how I came across Behrouz's work, and that was through the translations. Again, the importance of translation, why translation is so important. I came across Behrouz's Behrouz's work and him as a person through the translations of another person, and that was Munis Mansoubi. So Behrouz's first translator is Munis Mansoubi. She lives in Sydney, and she was working with Behrouz for quite some time, translated many articles for him, and it was his first article that he published in The Guardian, and the first time that he published under his real name that I came across his situation and his writing. And then we started a relationship soon after that. I started translating for him, amongst other things, and then that led to the opportunity to translate the book. And I'll also say this, which I think is really fascinating, in particular to the questions you asked Behrouz and Behrouz's responses. We're talking about a particular place here, I call it a neo-colonial experiment. It's a whole new phenomenon. I'm glad Behrouz mentioned that it needs to be understood in relation to this age, this time, because we're talking about a form of imprisonment that is being conducted by a liberal democracy. And one of the I guess key features is the paradox associated with a liberal democracy creating a particular space that it's associated with, and it controls, it manages, that resembles tactics, techniques, ideologies we often associate with fascism. So I think this is very important. And one of the key tropes in Behrouz's book is paradox. And I think Behrouz worked paradox really well into his book because of the fact that he was engulfed in paradox in the prison camp, and also because of the political situation, the border politics in relation to Australia. So here we have a prison camp where people haven't been sent to court, haven't been convicted of any crime, but are being kept indefinitely. So unlike a prison where you know your sentence, you're being kept indefinitely here. But at the same time, at a certain point, phones were illegal, but then they became legal. They became, I guess, uncriminalized. There was no ban on phones at a certain point. The prison doors, people were locked up within prisons, inside the prison, so they couldn't even communicate with each other. But then at a certain point, the doors opened and people could leave the prison camp, and then the whole island became a prison. So what we're talking about here is maybe something unprecedented in history. And I think paradox or even surrealism is one of the best ways to think about it. The last thing that I'll mention as well in terms of translation and the importance of translation and interpreting the whole phenomenon, including the book, is that unlike some of the writers who were imprisoned by fascist regimes in Europe, who were looking to European tradition, European philosophy, European poetry, European arts in terms of their salvation, in terms of their release, and in terms of resistance, Behrouz here wasn't looking to the Western tradition or the Australian, I guess, cultural scene and history. He was going back to his Kurdish heritage. And also, not only that, he was going back to a Kurdish heritage that was particular to his own region, particular to his own village. And I think this is really striking. There's so much to say about it that maybe we can go into. The other thing is that he connected with the indigenous people on Manus Island and drew strength from their history and from their stance against colonialism. So here we have, I think, in terms of a translator, as a translator, I had to do so much work to think about how all of these different pieces fit together and how Behrouz's voice comes out of the intersection between all of these facets.
This is thank you, Omid. It's a great cue up to next question. Also, we have to delve in this landscape that you both have sort of drawn up for us now. Because in the beginning, while reading your book, I was thinking that the Australian government practice of prisoning and torturing people in need of help was evil, and of course it is. It is also illegal. But while continuing reading, this evil gets more the shape of exactly this principle of governance, which you draw up now, which goes under the name of colonialism. And I think it's really important to stress this concept of colonialism and how this book shows how you think this concept, and also sort of deconstructs it at the same time as you depict the experiences, the horrible experiences by the exact people that you were in the prison. As Christina Quintano writes in her epilogue in the Norwegian translation of your book, this is a reminder of what is accepted to do with the most vulnerable people in the world. The prison make people behave like animals and also make them unities that can be managed. And as manageable unities, you were forced to stand in line for obtaining fundamental aspects of life like food, toilet, communication, medicine, asylum interviews, shaving, cigarettes, etc. And throughout your theorization of what you call the kyriarchic system, one gets the horrible impression that the Manus Island prison system is just one expression of a logic with much wider prevalence. Behrouz, could you tell about when you started perceiving the asylum prison system in terms of a kyriarchic system? A practical institution consisting of bosses, of documents, of letters, reports, schemes, surveys, and about how this theorization of your own situation did influence your experience of the Australian prison.
Yeah, I think, so you mentioned two things. You mentioned colonialism, so Omid already explained that really, you know, in all of these works, not only this book, you know, because of my background as a Kurd, that Kurdistan is a place which colonized in Middle East by Iran and other countries. So that was my experience, that I grew up, I born in that colonialism system. And identity always was a key question and concept for someone like me. And so when I arrived in Australia, so it was much easier to understand that how this policy towards the refugees is established on colonialism mentality. So that came through my life experience, you know, as a Kurd. I think that is very important thing that we can discuss that. But in terms of hierarchical system, I should mention that the phrase that I created to describe the system was system hakim, which is a Farsi word. And Omid suggested that he translated into this philosophical concept, hierarchical system. And but of course, you know, for me, you know, sometimes when I look at my first handwriting in Manus, I laugh at them because I find them very superficial, and I think that is very important that I mentioned that. I remember that when I arrived in Christmas Island, the first day they gave us just two paper, a very small notebook that has only had only 2 pages, and with a pen. And I had this opportunity, just I wrote something on it. And when I look at that, I think I find it very interesting that how it took such a long time for me to understand the soul of the system. And of course, we shouldn't expect that someone who just vanished to an island understand that system. It was very completely unknown system for me. And of course, I didn't experience something like that before. And of course, it took time, you know, just day by day, year by year, I just learn more and think more and understand more about the system. So I think that is very important, that transition, you know, is important. And that is not only for me, you know, I think that for all of the refugees, all of the detainees, anyone in that circumstances has his special and unique understanding of the system. And of course, all of us, we understand the system in a different way. But for me, what I can say about myself is that I took control of the system. You know, that was very important. That's why I think I feel that at least mentally I survived, you know. Of course, physically, you know, because of the situation that damaged me, but mentally I survived. And I think that is very important that when I talk about that, you know, when I arrived in New Zealand, the first day I was almost crying because I just, for a second, I look at past and I say, wow, I survived. And I think that was a huge achievement for me in that circumstances after many years, just to survive. And this surviveness is not just be alive. This surviveness is that my brain is working like others, you know, it's healthy, I'm healthy, mentally healthy. And I think that is very important. And of course, you cannot survive, mentally survive. You cannot protect your brain in front of that system without understanding that system, you know. And that is just, that happened through thinking, you know. When you understand a system which is very complicated, you really take control of it and become simple for you to understand it. And that complexity of the system actually has damaged many detainees. You know, I describe in the book that how people were thinking about the system. You know, when you think about a system which it's really is dominating on you, is creating violence, and you are facing that system. If you don't understand it and just you think about it, that impact on your brain and mentally you become sick. But for me, I think just through thinking and writing, I took control of the system. So that's why I survived, I think.
Thank you, Behrouz.
And in the book, I just wrote what I understood about the system. And now I think Omid mentioned a very, very good point, and sometimes that really it's amazing that when you reflect to now that I'm in New Zealand after more than a year, when I reflect to all of those years and all of the works, still I'm learning, through this reflection, I understand more. And sometimes even in the events, for example, now today that you mentioned a very good point about this intellectual, conversation, how that really was very helpful for me. It is the first time that someone asked me a question like that, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Behrouz. Omid, I have a question for you about language, and because many people work with or within the Australian asylum prison system, and among those we find the interpreters. In general, there is a very pessimistic development in the image of the interpreter in this book. First, you, Behrouz, you imagine a Kurdish interpreter seeing her own story in you and in your physical presence, almost, when you enter the plane from Christmas Island to Manus. Then later, the group of interpreters are perceived as under total control of the hierarchic system. It is written that in many ways the interpreters are the most helpless in the prison. They are deprived of their identity, they are like thinking loudspeakers, and they are under total control and deprived of their ability to express sympathy. One would think that sort of the linguistic competence that they have was going to serve more noble goals than sort of making the Australian hierarchy being able to repress its prisoners in a language that they understand. But in a way, the interpreters have lost their language, I would say, not by not speaking it, but by being forced to turn it against people in which they see themselves and their own personal history. And Omid, your activity as a translator in principle is not that different from that of the interpreters, but how then, what is your agency? Why is your agency as a translator so much wider than the agency of the prisoners the agency of the interpreters in this system?
I think it's really amazing how your questions are really well connected to the closing comments of the previous conversation. What Behrouz was saying about knowing the system helped him survive. So, really that intellectual activity, that deep analysis, that sophisticated critique was basically one of the reasons why he was able to come out of the system with his faculties, with his mind in a good place. He felt healthy coming out of the system, even though the system was designed to pretty much take his identity and ruin him psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, as well as physically. But I think this point that Behrouz made relates directly to what you're asking about in relation to interpreters and translators. I think majority, this is just my interpretation, my own personal interpretation, and I think it'll be interesting to do research on this topic, but I think a lot of the people working in the system as interpreters, as translators, as caseworkers, as counselors, as doctors, in so many ways. I think majority of them actually feel, at least in the beginning or before going into the system, a lot of them think they're doing a good thing. A lot of them think that they're actually there to help the people who are imprisoned. And I think they have this imagination, if they did their work really well, if they really treated the detainees with respect, if they were attentive to all of their needs and performed their duties in exceptional ways, then they would find freedom very quickly, and there would be no need to detain people in this particular way for such a long time. I think genuinely a lot of people feel that they can help, they can do something positive. But I think this goes back to Behrouz's point about knowing the system. I think majority of the people, and this goes right across Australian society and politics, a lot of people don't understand the system. Behrouz makes a really great point in his book that, and in other places as well, that even people in the system who design the system, even they don't know the system. You know, the system is so complex, it's so fluid, it's organic, it grows, it morphs, it multiplies, it changes direction, it defends itself, it justifies itself in really obscure ways, in really unpredictable ways. So I think a lot of the people working in the system who are there because they think they can make a change, I think they don't know the system. And I'm not saying that I know the system. I'm not saying that I'm have some kind of code, I've cracked some kind of code or anything like that. But we have to be clear on a number of things. I worked with Behrouz on a day-to-day basis, as he was saying before. We were in conversation every day, analyzing, talking, sharing ideas. I was going away and researching so much of what he was telling me. I was contributing a lot of my own ideas as well, and sharing a lot, and you know, we transform and change a lot of things as well. So it's impossible that when you spend this much time thinking about a system, that you don't suddenly go into the depths or into the belly of that system in some way. You know, I felt at some point that I was walking through the prison. I was in the prison for a certain period of time when we were working so closely. I would feel the anxiety, the stress, especially when Behrouz would send me works to translate his journalism, for instance, and it had to be done the next day. It had to be done that day sometimes. You know, this remains in your body. And I actually still have that in my body now. I mean, those years of doing that kind of work is in my body. It'll take me years to get it out of my system. And by doing this, you know the system, you understand something particular about state-sanctioned violence, you know something about border regimes in Australia in particular, after doing this for such a long time. And that's why I took a completely different approach. You know, my approach was not just political, not just practical, but also it was epistemic, it was symbolic, and it was attacking the colonial imaginary. So I was taking a very different approach to changing things. And, you know, 2 telephones, 2 people, 1 book, and we made a rupture. We injured the system in a way that I think people who spent many, many years trying to change are not able to. But the last point that I'll make also is that my own experience as a marginalized person in Iran, and someone who lives in exile, and someone who's also experienced racism in Australia, living in Australia, and also researches and is committed to decolonization and studying the different aspects of settler colonialism here in Australia, that gave me a good platform to work with someone like Behrouz as well. So, and of course, then to know the system. So when Behrouz talks about colonialism, it's not something that's unfamiliar to me. When he talks about discrimination and the hierarchical system, in fact, it was something that I was seeing around me quite regularly.
Thank you, Omid. I want to continue down the lane of the connection between experience and language. We have been speaking about creativity, intellectual work, and theorization, and also in a way loss of language in the case of the interpreters. And I think that we are starting to get able to see the importance of language when giving meaning to extreme experiences, as the ones that you write in No Friend But the Mountains. And this invites us to consider the possibility of translating texts written by those who has experiences, to translate texts of people who has the experiences by people that do not necessarily have shared the exact same experiences. And this issue is not unique for the translation of refugee experience. It's probably a case of all translation, that you do not have exactly the same experiences. But in cases like refugee experiences and also gendered and racialized experience, this might be relevant to discuss within a frame like this, where it is evident that language is formed by specific experiences. And in Europe and in Norway, this has gotten an expression very recently in the debates over who might or who might not translate the poetry written by Amanda Gorman, for example. There is a striking example of how experience influenced language in the beginning of your book, where you, Behrouz, you write about courage, because you left Indonesia by boat when trying to reach Australia, and your boat goes down, and you have to be saved. And in the silence on board of the boat that saves you, you look at the faces of those who have left Indonesia together with you, and you think about courage. And to understand courage, you write, one needs a form of courage in the act of thinking. It is not enough just to have shown courage in a specific situation. But still, your experience of danger at sea makes yourself able to think and to contemplate the concept of courage in a way that you have not been able to do before, you write. When your experiences do have such an impact on the way you are, on the way of thinking, a concept such as courage, what do you think about sort of letting, the process of letting people, other people translate what you write? What do you think about the possibility of translating experiences that translate language that is created with your extreme experiences?
Yeah, I think actually your questions are amazing. Your question take me to some places which I haven't talked about it before. Let me share with you a story that I don't remember that I already shared this. I don't remember that we were on a boat, and the boat actually was about to just drown, and half of the boat was full of water, and all of the refugees we were gathering in the second level of about like the roof of the boat. So everyone were gathering there, and I was sure that we are going to drown soon. I was sure, and but I saw two women in that, and actually later, just I think less than 5 minutes, we actually drowned. And I saw two women that they saw some fish on the water, and the fish were were jumping, and the women were talking about it, and one of them say to another one that, wow, look at this fish, how is beautiful. And another one said, yes, it's really beautiful. And I got so angry. I said, we are dying, and you are, that is very interesting. In that delusional circumstances, I think that was because those women, for a second, they just forgot where they are, and that was because of the long journey, because of the, sometimes I think about that how these people, can we say that these people are brave, or they didn't understand? that we are going to die, you know. And I think that was very unique. It's very unique experience, and most of people don't have this chance to experience something like this, you know, that to see something like this, you know. And I think so that is a very unique experience, you know. It's very unique experience, but we cannot say that the translator cannot translate this, you know. We cannot say that. And I think the translators, at least through their imagination, can understand, you know, some part of it, or understand. They didn't, you know, Omid didn't experience this, but if we ask Omid to translate this, I think he can still, through his imagination, do it, you know. And what Omid mentioned, actually, because of his background, you know, as a migrant, as a marginalized person, as someone who has been working on the ground with many detainees, many refugees for many years, of course, he is able to capture the soul of the writing, you know. That is very important, and which Omid did, you know, which Omid did. And I think we cannot just rely on life experience. Of course, life experience is too important, but this book and this kind of writing is not only life experience, you know. In this book, we have a philosophical layer, we have a psychological layer, we have folk culture, and we have, you know, that's why I think, and you know, most of the book that we read, actually, we didn't experience that, you know. That is the duty of the writer, to write it in a way that everyone connect to the writing, you know. And I think which Omid did.
Thank you, Behrouz. I'm interested actually to hear your perspective on the same issue, Omid. If you would like, yes. How do you perceive this translation of writings on experiences which are not yours?
Yeah, thanks for raising this issue. I have to admit, I've only very briefly looked into the debate around translation of Amanda Gorman's work, and so I know a little bit about it, but I have to look into it a lot further. And maybe to respond to your question, maybe I'll try to maybe put a different angle on it, rather than debate about who is able to, whether it'll be a good translation, whether it'll be accurate, you know, whether the, you know, preference should be given to people who have the same kind of identity or social, cultural position. Maybe we should talk about the conditions that actually give rise to the possibilities of a translation. For instance, I'm not trained as a translator, and I never, even today, I kind of find it weird to think of myself as a translator. I came into translation by accident. You know, I started translating for people a number of years ago, maybe like 8 years ago or something like that, and that were only just a few lines here and there. So when I met Behrouz, I had never really translated a full article or a complete text, but I did grow up interpreting for my parents since I was a child, so I was already thinking in 2 languages, but that's very different from translating a text. So my first real substantial experience in translating came from working with Behrouz, and it came from an activist space. So when I say the conditions for translating, maybe we should, I think it's important to look at the political dimensions, to who is encouraged to learn translation, to appreciate translation. Why is translation being taught? How is it being taught? Who is being encouraged to engage in translation? I think maybe this question about who should be translating someone's work and who shouldn't be, maybe wouldn't even be a major debate if we already had a long tradition and already had a political vision about what translation means in our lives, in our world, and what kind of work should be done as a result of teaching translation. So, you know, why is it that there aren't more people with backgrounds in displacement and exile being encouraged and being funded and being employed to do translation work that would end up resulting in something like No Friend But the Mountains? Why is it that, you know, now after winning all of these prizes and all of this international attention and, you know, all of this different research being done, it's still almost impossible for me to get support for my next translation project with Behrouz? Why is that the case? It's, for me, it's actually like, yeah, it's surprising and it's unsurprising at the same time why that's the case. Why aren't there more people with experiences, with lived experiences of particular situations, particular kinds of struggles? Why isn't there aren't there programs and aren't there kind of beneficiaries or benefactors available to really think about how important this is to everyone's knowledge, everyone's understanding of the world, everyone's understanding of each other? So I think maybe thinking about this debate in those terms might add some more, I guess, take the conversation into other directions. I think maybe important directions as well.
I think you have also, Omid, in your preface to the book, you have a very important concept of translation, which could be useful to what you outline. Exactly, the translation as a shared philosophical activity. I think that's a beautiful beautiful concept which you write clearly about in your preface, and which gives a very good expression of what translation can be and how it can be more a dialogic than sort of a monologic process from the translators. Maybe you will say something about this shared philosophical activity of translation.
You know, if we want to think about it a lot more radically, Behrouz is also one of the translators. You know, I was in conversation with him every day. I was clarifying terms. I was explaining, you know, the kinds of experiments that I was engaging in. So, you know, Behrouz was giving feedback on the translation. Behrouz was helping with the translation. He's part of that shared philosophical activity. Munis Mansoubi, she was my translation consultant. Sajjad Kabghani, Iranian researcher who was in Sydney at that time, he worked with me as well as a consultant. Yeah, I think we need, similar to the kind of critiques that are made about this idea of the single lone genius who creates theories and philosophies and writes books and articles, you know, moving away from that idea. We're all relational. We all interact with each other, and particularly in these important projects, these really pivotal, influential projects that end up having a huge impact on different fields and on different people from different places. It's more the case that relationships make the product, make the outcome, and something like No Friend But the Mountains could never have been produced if it weren't for people who were all committed, all focused on making it happen, and all investing, like believing in what Behrouz was writing, investing in what Behrouz was writing, really seeing that the outcome. I mean, I realized Behrouz's book was going to be a masterpiece after reading 2 or 3 pages. Like, I believed in it from that point. You know, I said, this is going to be something special. I can see something. I can feel something here. I can see how this can be used to make how it can be leveraged to make real transformation, to change the way people see displacement, exile, and incarceration, how we can make a rupture in the system. Once this team comes together, everyone has this right kind of vision and the right kind of commitment. You have many bodies, but one mind. It's, in terms of philosophy of mind, or in terms of metaphysics, I think there's really important discussions to be made about this. You have the situation where you have one body, many minds, many identities. But this was really unique because you had many bodies, one identity. And it was only when we were working on the project that took place, that was solidified. Now we're all separated, we're all moving on with our lives, doing different things. But that moment, that special moment, I think that's one of the magical aspects of No Friend But the Mountains. And imagine if we could invest more, if we can create the conditions, again, going back to creating the right conditions for a translation where so many different stars align, so many different kinds of principles and beliefs and notions and commitments for change all come together. If we could make that shared, if we can replicate that shared philosophical activity, not just in this space, but in other spaces, I think we'll see other magical moments, other special moments.
Thank you.
I think
So
I should add something. I think No Friend But the Mountains, it can be an example that we really learn a lot about how to work, as a writer or translator, how we should work. But I think what Omid mentioned is really amazing. That magical feeling that was created. But I think that is power. But this power, I think, comes from prison, itself, and it's very difficult for someone who is free, we create that again, that focus, that concentration. I think that was magical, because we were just in touch. Our connection was through imagination, that even I haven't seen on that time, I didn't see Omid, so we created that friendship, that connection for many years just through imagination, that how I was imagining the Australia or Omid or Munes and Sajjad and all of those people, and how those people, including Omid, especially Omid, were imagining the life inside the prison. I mean, that connection between the prison and out of the world was, I think, created that feeling, that magical, and it's really difficult. In a free life, you create that connection, that focus, that kind of focus and concentration. And sometimes I say that in Manus Island, for many years, I did lots of works, and especially with political activities. And in all of those years, I didn't make a huge mistake, just probably 2-1 small mistakes. But since I arrived in New Zealand, I made at least 4 huge mistakes in my career, in my political activities, in my approach to politics. And I think that is incredible. All of that came from that concentration, that focus, which is incredible.
we are going over time, Omid and Behrouz. I'm very happy that we have been able to have this conversation. It has been so interesting, learningful to speak with you, which prolongs the reading of the book, and I hope many people will look this up. But I get signals that we are out of time. So thank you very much for this conversation. I hope that you don't sort of sit in with the big things that you feel that are not expressed.
Yeah,
No,
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank you as well, and we can definitely continue in the future.
I hope so. So I will wish you a good evening and a good winter and a good continuing of your activities. I'm looking forward to follow both your works. What you do. It's been very inspiring and learned a lot from it. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And also, I think I should mention this. Recently, I've started to do that. You can follow me on Twitter. Yeah, that is a good way to be in touch, I think.
That's great. I've at least started following you on Facebook, and I'll see activities are happening there too. So
on Twitter, I mean.
I will take a note and I will follow.
Yeah, on Facebook. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you very much.
So,
yeah.
See you maybe once in the future, I hope.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Omid. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Behrouz. Thanks, Erlend.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.